Hey YouTubers, Linda here. Wow, I'm really out of practice making videos. I'm having to do multiple tries to get them right and not go over. So anyway, this is my second try on this one. I wanted to share with you guys something that I've really been thinking about for a couple of days. It's the subject of forgiveness. You know, the Lord's Prayer in Matthew says that how the Lord told the disciples to pray. One of the lines in that is, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." And, you know, there's the parable about the wicked servant who wouldn't forgive. That, you know, he was forgiven a large debt, and then he went out and demanded payment from someone else. And this is, you know, that's a very good example of unforgiveness. But I was thinking, not long ago, I was talking to someone, and they were telling me how this other person had really wronged them, an ex-husband in that case, and you know, we've all suffered injustice. If you're alive, you've had injustice done to you at some point. And this person was reciting all the things that they had done wrong, and then at the end they were like, "Oh, but I've forgiven them, I've forgiven them." And you know, I walked away thinking, something about that doesn't feel right in my spirit, and so I was really meditating on it. And it struck me one night, and I was thinking about it the other night, it struck me that if we blame someone for something, we haven't forgiven them. And I went to the dictionary and I looked up the word blame. Well, first I looked up the word forgive, which means to grant pardon or to absolve, to give up all claim on the account of, give up, you know, any debt or obligation on that person's part to pay you back, to cease to feel resentment against. And I thought, if I don't have resentment against someone, am I going to be speaking negative things about them? Am I going to be talking about something that they did against me if I've forgiven them? Am I going to be reciting that story? I don't think I am. And forgive also means to cancel the indebtedness of. To blame means to find fault or place responsibility for something. Like a lot of people blame their parents. Oh, you know, my mom or my dad was a terrible parent, and that's why I'm all messed up. And it hit me that to blame someone means to charge them with something. Like if someone breaks a law, they're charged with that crime. Okay? So I looked up charge. And one of the things it means is to enter a debt against. And it means to impose a price. So you're charging them. You're imposing a price on what they did to you or they did against you. It means to accuse. You charge somebody with a crime, you're accusing them. If we charge someone with something they did to us, we're accusing them. Who's the accuser? It's not Jesus. So we're agreeing with the enemy if we do that. We're making an alliance with Satan if we charge someone with something against us. It means, and this one really struck me, to attack by rushing violently against. So if I charge someone with something they did against me, it's like rushing on them with a violent attack. And I said all that to say this. I think that a lot of times we think we have forgiven people, and in reality we haven't. And I've been guilty of this myself. And the truth is, there are times when people do things against us that are so bad, that cause us so much pain, so much loss, things that damage us, that it's really hard to forgive what they've done. And there are probably times when we do things against other people that it's equally hard for them to forgive us. And I've had an instance where years ago, about a year after I got into the walk, the Word wasn't open to me for about a year. And when the Lord opened the Word to me, I just read the Bible just constantly. And one night I was reading it at home, and at the time I was living in South Louisiana, and I came to a part that said, forgive us, you know, you have to, if you don't forgive other people, you won't be forgiven. And I panicked. And I immediately made a list of everyone that, you know, I felt any resentment against, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to be in trouble if I don't forgive. And God's forgiven me a lot of stuff, y'all. And so I made my list, and I went all the way down my list, and I forgave everybody, or I think I did, until I got to one name, and it was my ex-husband. I was in an abusive marriage for about 12 years, and it was really bad. And I couldn't forgive him. And I was absolutely terrified, because I knew if I didn't forgive, that meant I wasn't forgiven of my sin, and if you're unforgiven, you cannot get into heaven. More than anything, I wanted to go to heaven. And I got on my knees and I cried out to God, and I said, Lord, I can't do this. And your word says I have to, and I can't do it, so I'm asking you for help. And because I was still angry at my ex-husband. And, when you are beat on for 12 years and you come out of it with all kind of psychological, problems and different kinds of damage, it does something to you. It is hard to let go of that, but it doesn't do any good to hang on to it. So I stayed on my knees and I said, Lord, I'm not getting up from this floor until you help me, because I can't go any further if I'm not forgiven. And I just kept crying out to God and crying out to God. And about 5 minutes later, God touched me, and He just flooded my soul with compassion for my ex-husband. And suddenly I saw in the Spirit that the things he had done to me had been out of the pain that he himself had suffered from things that had happened to him. And from that moment forward, I was able to pray for him, really, really pray for him to be saved, pray for God to help him, pray for God to change his life. And all the anger that was associated with the memories and all the pain went away. As a matter of fact, a lot of the memories just went away. I didn't think about them. And later after that, I really just didn't talk about it very much. And if somebody that had, known me during that time brought it, oh yeah, your husband used to beat on you, and I'd be like, yeah, well, whatever. And there was no emotion associated with it. And I think, and there have been times since then when other people have hurt me deeply and over a long period of time, and I thought I had forgiven and said, oh Lord, I forgive this person. And then later I would find myself dwelling on what that person had done against me, and I would become angry. And that's a clue. If you think that you have forgiven someone, sit down and think about what they did against you. Really think about it. Number one, if you can remember every instance, that's not a good sign, because that means you have laid those things to their account. You have an accounting. And what does the Bible say about love? It makes no account. Takes no account of the wrongs done against it. If you can account everything that they did against you, that's not a good sign. If you sit and think about what they have done against you, or even what they're doing against you now, and you get very angry, they're not forgiven. You've not forgiven them from your heart. And it's very easy to think that we have forgiven someone and to not truly forgive them from our heart. When it comes to something like that, and we know that the enemy attacks us most often through people really close to us, because he can wound us deeper and longer that way. It's harder to forgive when the people close to you wound you like that than it is to forgive someone you barely know. And so there are times when, he lands a direct hit, and we're going to have to ask God for help to forgive that person so that we can release that charge against them and stop blaming them in our spirits when we think that we've forgiven them. And, in the Bible, where the servant who refused to forgive the debt after he had been forgiven, remember what happened to him? He was handed over to the tormentors. Now, one thing that you'll find about unforgiveness is it doesn't torture the other person who's done the wrong. It tortures you. It tortures you every time you remember, and every time you're angry, and every time you hurt all over again over what was done, a year ago, a month ago, whenever, a lifetime ago. It torments you. That's why you feel so free after you truly forgive, because the tormentors are gone. So unforgiveness is a sure way to hold yourself in bondage. It's also a sure way not to get into heaven, because God requires that we forgive completely. And I would encourage you to think, about the people that you think you've forgiven, and really examine your heart. If there's anger still there, if there's resentment still there, if there's blame in your conversation or in your mind, you need to seek God and forgive that person. Not so much for their sake. Doesn't mean that what they did wasn't wrong. It means that We serve a loving and forgiving God who commands us to forgive, and we care more about obedience to God than we care about what that person should have done. God will pay you back for the injustices that were done against you. He will pay you back. The person probably can't and probably won't. But I encourage you all to examine your hearts. Unforgiveness is very serious to God. We cannot play around with it. And it's miserable. So, thanks for watching. Everybody have a great weekend.